Okay, who's ready? So today we have no slides, and this is our first of many demo days. A question already? Yes, Joey. Yeah, there's still a lecture question today. You can't just leave. I mean, you can. It's not that many points, but and I drop a whole bunch of lecture questions. You could just leave, but I encourage you to stay. We got some good stuff going on. So today's the first of many. I, for one, am not ready. Sorry, Cole. So today's the first of many. I like to do these like the last Friday of homework block. Is just showing you examples and reinforcing what we've learned for the past 3 weeks. So we're at the end of homework 1 content. We already covered everything that you need to do the homework, but I covered most of it in slides. I only jumped to code just a couple of times. So today we're going to live in the code and we're going to live in the terminal and see practical applications, practical examples of a lot of the stuff we do that we just learned about. When I do these, I have like a plan in my head of, like I have a 50-minute lecture prepared, of course, because if I don't, I'll be screwed up here. So I have 50 minutes of stuff prepared that I can just go through and show you things that I think you'll need, that I think you'll have trouble with, or that you want to see. But these are meant to be interactive. So if you have things that you want to see, I can live code things, do examples that you specifically want to see. Because I'm just guessing at what you want to see. You can just go for the ride and see what I'm going to show you, or say, I'm really having trouble with this thing, or whatever. Yeah?
This isn't the last Friday for the homework, by the way.
For homework 1, yeah. So Monday starts, it's not the last Friday before the due date, but it's the last Friday of content that I cover. Starting Monday, I'm going to start covering homework 2 content. And homework 2, I meant to get it released earlier, but I spent 10 hours on Autolab yesterday getting that thing spun back up. So I didn't get it out, but it will be released by Monday. I'll always release a homework before I start covering content for that homework. So before Monday, homework 2 will be released.
Sorry about that. I just thought was worried other people would be confused and they're worried or something.
Oh, sure. I mean, yeah, I do want that clarification. Yeah, today's the last lecture in the content for homework 1. We covered all of the content that you need. You can complete homework 1 with what you know right now. So today's reinforcement and examples to show you how to do it, how these things really work in practice. Project group talk, not yet. Next week we'll start talking project as well. Because next week I saw the request, I got to get this form up and running and get all the project stuff out there too. It's all upcoming. I had it in my schedule. I was going to do it all yesterday, and then Autolab went down, and there goes my Thursday. So without further ado, let's start going through some of these things. I want to start in PyCharm. No, I want to start with the homework doc. So we can do all this stuff, but when we get to the API, you should have a question of, how are we going to test this stuff? For objectives 1 through 3, you test it by going to your browser, typing in a URL, and sending a GET request through the browser to your server, and then just see if the right stuff shows up. You can go into the browser console, go to the network tab, and view the requests and responses, and make sure everything's in order, make sure you have the right headers, the right content type, the right content length, all that good stuff. But when you get to the post request in objective 4, how do we test that? Yes?
Do we have to install like the client to interact with the database?
Kind of. Well, I'm about to show you. You'll see. We're going to use Postman is the short answer. So we're going to use Postman. So we need a way to simulate post. We can do GET just fine. We need a way to simulate post, put, and delete requests, which are tougher to simulate in the browser. Now you can write some custom HTML and build forms and stuff to make these requests to your server, but we haven't talked about any of that stuff yet. Feel free to do it that way if you want to do it. I'm not going to stop you from doing that. But I'm going to show you a tool called Postman, which is going to allow us to send requests of any type and any structure to our server. So I have a server here And whenever I open this, I have to be very careful about what I show in lecture. I do intend to spoil this one method right here. So I'm opening a Mongo connection, I'm connecting to a database, and I'm connecting to a couple collections. This user's ID collection I'm using to do the auto increment feature in MongoDB. I wasn't going to show this code this semester, but I have in the past, and the code's out there. I saw someone in office hours with this code, and they're using it. So I might as well level the playing field and show it to everybody. This is my code where I'm just keeping track of the IDs in an auto-incrementing feature. So whenever I want to get the next ID for the next user that's being created, whenever a new user is being created, I'm going to get the current object. This whole collection is only going to store one object, so I only expect one to be in there. I'm going to find one and give it, give me everything, but there should only be one thing. I'm just going to get the one thing that's stored in this collection. That's going to have my last ID in it. I'm going to read that as an int, increment it by 1, and then update the collection. I'm going to update absolutely everything in this collection, which is only one document. And I'm going to set the last ID to next ID, which is the incremented ID, and then return next ID. If there's nothing in, bless you, if there's nothing in the database, this is the very first time I'm accessing the database, I'm just going to insert an ID of 1 and return 1. Yes.
Is it okay if we use this code or like
You can, any code that I show in lecture is fair game, which is why I'm not going to show too much code in lecture. But this one is kind of auxiliary to what I really want you to learn, so this I'm fine giving you. I don't really care if you can set up MongoDB to do auto-increment. If MongoDB had an auto-increment feature, I would allow you to use that. It's just not related to what I really need you to know in this course, what I need you to learn in this course. So that I wanted to give away, but I'm going to be very careful to not click these other files, lest you get large solutions. What's up? Oh, thought you had some. All right, so I have a Docker Compose file. This is set up a little bit different than what we're doing currently. This is set up for homework 4 when we get that far. We're actually going to run on ports 80 and 443 by the time we get to homework 4. So if you're wondering why I'm not typing any port numbers when I go to the browser, that's why. I just want to get that out there. But I'm going to do Docker Compose up, which it was just up. I stopped it just to, with Control-C, just to show you this. I'm going to do Docker Compose up, and that should run my app, which has some of the, has the user's endpoints implemented. And I want to show you how to test them. Yeah. Nginx? Well, it's a question for another day. So my brief answer is I'm using it as a reverse proxy server. So it's sitting in between the client and my server. So Nginx is listening on ports 80 and 443, my public ports, and then it's going to translate requests into requests for my server itself. I'm using it here so it can listen on both 80 and 443. So I have HTTP and HTTPS both connecting to Nginx. And then it's going to convert either type of request to HTTP only requests and then send them to my server. So when I'm writing my code, I just care about HTTP. When you're writing your code, you're only caring about HTTP. But by the end of the semester, that server will have a layer of HTTPS sitting in front of it through Nginx, and you will have encrypted traffic through your HTTP only code, which is a nice way to get us as developers only thinking HTTP and then have something else worrying about the encryption. So we're listening on port 8000 inside the container, but I have this all set up to go through and route through Nginx. So when I go to my browser, it's hard to see, I guess, but I'm just going to localhost/users. If I just go to localhost, I get my page. And if I do https://localhost, no, I know this one. We do get, it's not secure because it's a self-signed cert. That's a conversation for another lecture as well. But I can access it through HTTPS on port 443 as well. So I have HTTPS, just in case you don't believe me because I did some other stuff in there. We can get encryption for what it's worth. So I have extra setup there that we'll talk about in homework 4. So I want to go to localhost users, and I want to access my API, and I want to test my API. So I can go to the browser and access, /users. That's fine. It's a GET request. It just returns a list of all the users. There's nothing in there right now. But what else do I, how do I do anything else? The worst part about this room is they love using it for tours. That's why we got this glass window here, so they could just hit the button, look in. They got to open the door anyway. There's one semester I was teaching in this room, and every single day they would come in. Sometimes they would come into the room, and I would just do the stop and stare at them. And they'd be like, are we interrupted? Yes, you're interrupting. Did you have a question? Anybody have a question? Oh, I forget what it was. What did I say?
I think you were asking us how are we supposed to send posts or something?
Oh, yeah. So how are we going to send posts? So we want to use something called Postman. I already have it up and set up, so I want to start from scratch with a new tab here. We want to use something called Postman. It's linked from on this day on the course schedule. I never remember if things are .com or .net anymore, so I'll just do a Google search. It was .com. But postman.com. And you'll have to create an account, which I feel like everything wants us to create accounts these days. You have to create an account, and you also have to download the desktop, whatever they call it. I don't know what it's called. It should be running somewhere here. Bless you. This is my Postman, right? So I have the Postman desktop client running on my desktop, on my laptop already. You'll have to download, install, and run that client to get this to work. So you need the web page and the client. Maybe you can do things directly through the client. I don't know. But if that client isn't running, you'll get all kinds of errors in Postman. It won't be able to send any requests for you. So when you log into Postman, you'll get this interface, which is way too cluttered in my opinion. I just want to find where to create a new request, and I can never find it. I swear this page is different every single time I go here. It was different this morning. I don't want to update. Go to my workspace? Oh, okay. Thank you. It's riveting content, me just searching an interface, trying to figure out the right button. I don't want to update right now. I'm in the middle of something. And I want to create a new HTTP request. So this is going to give me an interface to be able to send an HTTP request with any structure that I want. So we can start with localhost /users. We can make that GET request that we made in the browser. I'm going to send that off, and I get content. because I misspelled users. And I get my empty array. So I just sent off a GET request through Postman, got the response, and displayed the response in the browser. I'm testing my own API, but we can do like google.com, and we'll get all the HTML for Google. You can send requests just like you would in the browser with this. Where the power comes in, and let me get my localhost back here, localhost /users. Where the power comes in is this beautiful drop-down box right here. I can change the request method, and I want to change this to post for this example, and I want to send a post request to my API to be able to simulate somebody using the API. Did I give the overview? This is for testing your API. I think I mentioned that. This isn't strictly required, but it's damn near required if you want to make sure that your API is working. You have to hit your endpoints somehow to test them to make sure they're working before you submit to Autolab. This is probably the best solution. Postman is made to test APIs. Like, this is what it's designed for. This is what it does, and it does it very well. So strongly recommend that you do this. If you want to test in another way, that's fine. If you want to not test at all, I mean, good luck. Maybe you'll get it, but maybe you'll just get lucky and everything will be formatted perfectly, but unlikely. You got to test these things. Yeah?
How does it know what port to send the request to if you haven't specified?
So if you don't specify a port, and you're sending an HTTP request, it'll default to port 80, which is where my Nginx is listening. If you send an HTTPS request and don't specify a port, it defaults to 443. So I'm using the two default ports and listening on those. So I'm simulating, like when we actually go out to deploy our apps, I'm simulating that. So Nginx is listening on my default public ports and then forwarding to port 8000 inside my container. So my app is still running on port 8000, but this is how I would set it up for deployment. Yep, no problem. So let's send a post request. Well, I can send it, but it's not going to do anything. Bad gateway. Oh, I didn't even expect that error, but it's not going to work yet. So we have all these other options, and Postman is a very powerful tool. I implore you to explore all the features, and you can write scripts and stuff. There's a lot you can do here. I'm just showing you the bare basics right now. But you can set, like for example, you can set all your headers. If I want to send extra headers, let's send a header actually. How's it going, server? Let's make this bigger too, by the way. We're at it. So I just set a header. You can set whatever headers you want. You can set, I don't know, you can do whatever you want. Set some cookies, whatever you want. Cookies are headers, I'll keep that one brief, but you don't see a cookies tab, and I mentioned cookies. Cookies are just headers. But what we care about right now is body. We want to send a body of this request. The body of our post requests are going to be a JSON string in a specific format. So I'm going to click body. I have options. Right now I was sending a GET request, so none is selected. I want to go to raw, and I'm going to get a drop down over here. It's default to text. I don't want to send text. I mean, I do, but I don't. I want to send JSON. And when I select this, I keep wanting to say Postgres. Postman is going to, check my formatting to make sure that I'm sending a properly formatted JSON string. So let's get that JSON string. We have email. I'll put my email address at buffalo.edu and username. Use Jesse as my username. And it's going to make sure I'm formatted properly. For example, if I have single quotes here, Postman's going to be like, you can't use single quotes. There should be a pop-up. Oh, it's not telling me what the error is. But it should say, you can't use single quotes. That's not the JSON standard. So I'm going to change those to double quotes. So now I have a properly formatted JSON string. I'm going to send this. I don't want to scroll. I think I do have to zoom out a little bit here. I'm going to send that and make sure that the response is what I expect. I, in fact, got the response that I do expect. I got the ID, no underscore ID, just what's defined in the homework document, email, username, and the ID that was assigned. Yeah? We covered that, so I'll keep this one brief, but it'll have a body. After the headers, there will be a blank line, and then the content of the request. Actually, I want to hop back over here. Oh, why did I get an error? I gotta find the right request. Post users. Here's my headers. Here's the header that I set. Shows up in my request. And then there will be a blank line. And then the body. And I'll have content length and content type. The content length is going to be the number of bytes in that body. And then I get my content type of application JSON, because it's a JSON formatted string. So I got that request. My server was able to process this. I'm reading, okay, this is post for users, so I'm expecting a body to this request, and I'm going to process that, assign it an ID, etc. Do the things that are defined in the homework doc. And if I send a couple more of these, I should see an auto incrementing ID. And if I pop this back to a GET request, I should see all of my users that were just created. I pop this off 5 times, 5 post requests, and I should be able to see them all when I send another GET request. Yeah?
JSON strings, are you only allowed to put ASCII characters in there, or can you put anything in
Any UTF-8. And if I go to my browser again, I can see that same data appears. So I'm feeling good. My API, at least post and list, are working, getting a list of all of the users and creating new users. That all seems to be working fine. And I can, during your testing, you should definitely restart your server. Stopping. Start it again. Send another post. And not only should all the data persist, so all the data should still be there, but when I send another post, the ID has to pick up where it left off. This is why you can't store your IDs in a data structure or in a variable or anything. It has to be stored in the database because you have to pick up your numbering after a restart. So keep that in mind, whatever solution you have for keeping track of those IDs. I'm using the database with a separate collection because then I'm going to persist through a restart, and I'm not going to restart at ID 1 every time my server reboots. Leaking email in lectures. All right, any questions on that? Very, very useful tool. That's how you want to test objectives 4 and 5. Don't think I want to be in this server anymore. I think that's the only things I wanted to show here. Almost certain. If I'm forgetting something, I'll remember by the end and get back there. I'm pretty sure that's it. So let's jump over to something else we were talking about. A file can never be converted to a string. I've said that a lot. I said it'll corrupt the file. Let's see that in action. So here I have some Python code. And sorry, JavaScript lovers, I am doing quite a bit of Python today. I have 2 methods here, functions, I guess, in this case. And let's start with the good one. So I'm going to copy a file. I'm going to read a file in binary mode. I'm going to get the bytes of it. And then I'm going to write those bytes to another file. So I'm going to copy this file name to this file name. So I have twitch.png, which is the Twitch logo. I have this image in this directory, and I just want to copy this image. So I'm going to run files.py, and I'm going to look at copy.png, which was created, and it's a copy of the image. Yay. That hopefully everybody's cool with. The only thing is, and I'll talk about this when I come back to it, the B here is the only thing that should be new there. But reading a file, writing a file, you've known that since 1.15. So let's take a look at the image-specific stuff. We're going to read this file, and now I'm going to do almost the same exact thing, except now I'm going to convert my image to a string. You've heard me say many times, never, ever, 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 ever do this. Convert the image to a string. Now, all I'm going to do is convert it to a string. This will use UTF-8 encoding. Take my bytes of my image, convert it to a string, and then when I write it to a file, I'm going to encode the string back into bytes. So encode is going to take the string and convert that into bytes according to the UTF-8 encoding. UTF-8 by default in Python. So all I'm doing is taking my image bytes, doing the same exact thing as before, except now I'm converting it to a string, converting it back to bytes. I'm going to run this again. And my image is corrupt. I do not get back to the same bytes. Even though I took bytes, encoded them with UTF-8, decoded them as UTF-8. I should get back to exactly where I was, but I don't because an image is not valid UTF-8. UTF-8 has that property, if the first bit is a 0, it's a 1-byte character. If the first bit starts with 1, 1, 0, it's a 2-byte character. Well, when I'm reading the bytes of an image, it's not going to follow that protocol. If, like the continuation bit, if it's a 1, 1, 0, the next byte has to start with 1, 0, and the byte after that, just the next byte, has to start with 1, 0. That's part of UTF-8. We had that chart up earlier last week, I believe. That has to be followed for it to be valid UTF-8. My image doesn't follow that. Sometimes it's going to have a byte that starts with 1, 1, 0, and then the next byte won't start with 1, 0. So when you're trying to decode this as UTF-8 text, it doesn't decode properly. Some languages, you'll get straight up errors. It'll just say, some languages right here, you'll get an error, which I would honestly prefer. You'll get an error, can't decode this, it's not valid UTF-8, and the program crashes. Python just kind of plugs away and gives you garbage. You're just going to get garbage in this string. And then when you encode it, whatever that garbage ended up being, it's not going to get back to your original image. You will break your images if you ever treat them as strings. And it's easy to do this by accident. So let's go back to our good example. We've successfully copied the image, but instead of reading it in byte mode, I'm just going to read it. Oh, that gives me an error. It doesn't even try to do that one. No, I think it's because I have to slap a decode here. Or encode. M code. Thank you. No, it's just not even going to try. It's just not even going to do it. So if I don't have that B there, that means read this as binary. Read the bytes. Do not interpret it as a string. By default, opening a file in Python like this is going to interpret that file as a string, because in most use cases, we're reading a string from the file. The image is not a string. It's binary data. It's bytes. You have to read it as bytes. So make sure you're reading it in byte mode, or else you're not going to be able to open your images. Once you have images, like the code set up for images, you can actually do the same thing for your HTML, your CSS, and JavaScript as well. Even though it is actually text, if you're just serving that content as static content, you're not going to process it at all, there's no reason to ever convert those to strings. You can just read them in byte mode and treat them as images. There's no reason to do anything else with them. So you can have one method that's, say, serve file, and then have it open any arbitrary file and always treat it as bytes. And then call that same method for your HTML, your CSS, your JavaScript, and your images to be able to get some nice code reuse out of it. Questions on this or anything else you want to see while we're in this code? I can live code examples. Nobody ever takes me up on it. So I always make sure I have 50 minutes prepared for 312 because nobody takes me up on that offer. Either that or you just like the examples I choose and you just want to see what I got next. Okay, so, yes? How do I write to the database? Oh. Yeah, that's what we did right here. So I did insert one. I had my collection in MongoDB, and I did insert one. And that's going to add this document into my collection. So now I have a document which can be thought of as a JSON string, or a JSON object. that has a key of last ID and a value of 1. And then when I want to read those, I'm going to call find to be able to access that data, and then I'm even updating that data here to be able to get new values in there. But adding data into a collection, at least, I don't think I have SQL code at the ready. I'd have to dig it up, and that doesn't make for riveting content, me going through my file structures. But this is an example of MongoDB. Mm. So the Mongo provided one isn't going to be an int in the homework, and I set the homework up like this on purpose. The homework isn't going to have an underscore in front of the ID, and it's going to be of type int. So you can't use that underscore ID because I want you to do a little bit. How do I want to say this? That underscore ID isn't really built for APIs like this. You have this big honking string that you're going to send on every single record that you send over. It's cumbersome. Users don't want to see that, and it's not very user friendly to work as an ID. One, because it is a string, but it's just not really suitable for that task. So we want an ID that we control, that we assign to it, and those IDs also have to go in your URLs. When you get a specific user, you got to put that ID. So if you start at 1 and just auto increment, when you're using the API, it's easy to say /user/7. But if you're typing in that whole underscore ID, your only choice is to cut and paste. Are you going to make your users cut and paste, or do they actually have to type those up? Like, it just gets awkward to use those things. So I don't want you in the habit of using them. But those are used internally for MongoDB to identify that record. So those will always exist because MongoDB is using those extensively, and they're well suited for that task. But they're just not well suited for our task. Yeah. By Monday, I gotta get them up. I wanted to have them up today, but Autolab didn't agree with that. Autolab took away my Thursday. I wanted the forms and homework 2 released. Autolab disagreed. Yeah.
This is kind of more for adult work, but do we need to take into account like raw post requests? Like if you just took out the packet?
No, you can assume your post requests are going to be properly formatted, or else that objective would get a lot more difficult. I just want you setting up an API and getting used to how that works. Doing error correction, and you would have to use a try-catch. Try to decode this as JSON, catch JSON format exception. Like it just makes it more complicated, but not complicated in a way that pertains to 312 content. So there's no reason to do that. Just assume it's properly formatted. Yeah. Oh, it's not a handout. All right. Let's talk about character encodings. So let me just run this first and then explain what we're going to see in this output. So here I have a function, show encodings, which is going to take a string and it's going to format it in a whole bunch of different ways so we can see how these strings are formatted. First, I'm going to, am I giving it bytes? No, I'm giving it a string. My brain didn't work for a second there. I'm going to encode it using UTF-8. So I'm going to get the bytes of the string. I'm going to print out the string, and I'm going to print out the bytes of that string as well, using str, not using decode. So I'm not decoding the bytes. I'm just printing out the bytes directly. Then I'm going to format the bytes in decimal. So you can see the decimal values for ASCII values. You can look up an ASCII chart and verify that those are going to be the decimal values for the ASCII characters. I'm going to print them out in hex. I'm going to print them out in binary, so you can see the straight up ones and zeros. Print out the length of the string and then the length of the bytes. So we know from our content length, I've said this multiple times, that the length of the string is not always the length of the bytes that you're going to send, which is your content length. Your content length is always the number of bytes in the body of the response or request when you're intaking data. The number of bytes, not the string length. So let's take a look at this on various strings. First, I call it with hello, and then I call it with various other characters here. So with hello, and we really just want to look at the output here. With hello, let's do one at a time. I'll get there. Let's resize this thing. Let's start with our hello world. Hello as a string, it's just hello. As a byte array, it's going to be a string, but if you see this B and then some quotes, that means that this is a byte array, and it's just printing out the bytes. Now, in Python and in a lot of languages, when you print out an array of bytes, if that byte is a valid ASCII character, it'll often show you the ASCII character. So it's showing the ASCII characters here instead of hex or binary or anything. That's why I have to have my loops that are actually converting them to hex and binary. Yeah? Yeah, I'm about to do it. So that's in bytes. Yeah, I'm starting with just to show what I'm doing. I start with hello, which is all ASCII values, but we'll get into the Unicode. So in bytes, this B, and if you want to create a byte string with ASCII values like this, you can actually create a byte string literal like this. You can say B and then single quotes and give it whatever string you want, and it'll go directly to the byte array. It'd be the same thing as creating a string and doing dot encode. It would be the same thing. But you can use this as a literal. You can use this syntax. Decimal, here are the ASCII values. Hex, here are the ASCII values in hex. Here's the binary. We should see each byte starting with a 0. Python will truncate leading zeros. So if you count the bits, you'll count 7 in each of these. I don't think we have any 6 characters, but we should see 7 bits in each one of these, because there are leading zeros on each one of them, because they are ASCII characters. ASCII characters start with a 0 and then 7-bit encodings. String length 5, byte length 5. Cool. So let's get to a more interesting example. The 1/4 symbol part of Unicode. As a string, it's 1/4, but we already see differences when we're printing out the bytes. Neither of the bytes here are valid ASCII. Neither of them start with a 0. So we actually do see the bytes. The /x means this is a hex value. We have the hex value C2 and the hex value BC, which we should see the same things over here. 0x also means this is hex, C2 and BC. Our decimal values should all be over 127 because we have a leading 0 in these. And if we see the binary, we can actually see our UTF-8 encoding in action. We're going to see a 110. So this 1/4, it's not ASCII, so we know it's going to be more than 1 byte. So we're going to see the encoding tell us how many bytes it is. It has 2 bytes, we can see. But in the encoding, it's going to tell us that 110 in the first byte means this is a 2-byte character. So we have 110, and then the next byte is a continuation byte. It's going to start with 10 to denote this is a continuation byte. Your images, sometimes you'll have a byte that starts with 110, and then the next byte starts with anything other than 10. That's going to give you an encoding error. You can't use UTF-8 because it's not following the encoding. But this is valid UTF-8, and we're going to follow the encoding. 110, then 10. String length 1, byte length 2. So now if we're using our content length, if our content length is the length of the string, we're no longer getting all of our information. We're not going to get everything that we need here because the byte length and the string length are different. We need to measure the byte length. If we send this, if we have a response and this is the only character in the response, and we say content length is 1 because we took the length of the string, we don't get any content on our page. Things are broken. The user doesn't see your content. And we can make these more complex. I have multiple characters. I have 2 characters and a space. The space is valid ASCII, so I actually get the space character when I'm printing out my string, which only makes things confusing. But if we print out the hex, I can see that that's a hex 20 or a decimal 32. That's the space character encoding. And I can see that space character here. The euro symbol is a 3-byte character. I see the 1110 is the first byte, and then 2 continuation bytes, 1010. Now string length 3, we're starting to get pretty far off. String length is 3, byte length is 6. If I use the string length, the user's only getting half the content that I'm sending them. They're going to get the 1/4 in the space. They're not going to get the euro symbol at all. The whole thing's just gone. And this character, I forget what this character is, if anybody knows what it is. Hopefully it's not anything inappropriate. This is a 3-byte character, just like the euro symbol, 1110, 1010, 3 bytes, string length 1. And finally a 4-byte character, 11110, 101010 on the continuation bytes. So we can see that encoding in action in Python. We have a string length of 1. It's only 1 character, but it's 4 bytes to represent that character. Make sure you're reading the number of bytes that are being sent. Encode into a byte array, and then take the length. Very, very important. I don't want to talk about these other things, but yeah, you can't use Atlas for the homework if that's the question. You have to use a database inside inside a Docker container. Bless you. So let's see this. Where do I want to go? Servers, Python, just Python. So let's go back to server 1 in Python. Any questions about that, by the way? So if we go to our Python, we have our server that just says hello. If I have my content length, say I have my content length of 3 instead of 5, and I want to run this, the browser will, well, I won't spoil the surprise, I guess. The browser will respect your content length, and it will only read that many bytes. So if your content length isn't accurate, one, you have a content length that's not as many bytes as the body of your response, which is the case we're seeing here. The browser is only going to read that many bytes, and you're going to be missing content. Your users aren't going to have all of the content that you wanted them to have. Or 2, your content length is more bytes than you're sending, and the browser hangs. Well, we only got a minute. Oh, the clock's so far off. I got time. This content length is 6 instead of 5. I'm only sending 5 bytes. But my content length is 6. Did that not restart? Oh, there we go. Oh, because I expect it to not do anything. Let me open it in a new. I don't get anything. The browser hangs because I said, browser, I'm sending you 6 bytes. Now, that's what my content length says. That's a serious contract to a browser. So the browser's going to read 6 bytes, but I'm only sending 5. That browser's going to sit there and wait. It's going to say, you said 6. I'm waiting for the 6th byte. And browser hangs. Users are mad because your website doesn't load. Everything's broken. You got to make sure your content length is exactly the number of bytes that you're sending. Too few, users missing content. Too many, browser hangs. Get that content length set exactly to what it's supposed to be. Yeah.
Is this a method of attacking a website?
Uh,
Or is there
yes.
like easy measures?
There is. There's DOS attacks that are based on this. So you send a post request, and you say content length 100, but you only send 1 byte. You send 1 billion of those requests. And the server is now waiting for all of those requests. Like here we saw it with the browser, but it's the same thing for any request to your server that has content length, that has content. You send a whole bunch of requests, but you only put 1 byte of content, but a longer content length, and the server is going to wait on all of those connections until whatever timeout value is set for it to give up on those things. So whatever their timeout is, it's taking that long on every single request, and you just bombard it with those requests, and you can successfully DOS a server. Yeah.
And then the billion is to like flood all available ports.
Yeah. Well, not all available ports, but all available resources, threads, or if it's using a thread pool or whatever, you want to use up all the resources. But the server will just be listening on a single port. But you want to take up its resources so it can't handle any legitimate requests. I mean, don't do that, please. But but that's one form of DOS attack. Another one is, we talked about TCP, three-way handshakes. Another one's the three-way handshake attacks. You just initiate a three-way handshake and then stop. You don't do, the server sends the second part of the three-way handshake and you just don't send the third one back. So it has to have, it has to be waiting on that TCP connection until that timeout. And it's really cheap for the attacker to use. All they're doing is sending the first part of a TCP three-way handshake. It's super lightweight for the attacker. More bytes to enable dark mode. That's how I get dark mode on my website. I just set the content length to more than what I'm sending. I should have hit on this a little bit more. I've said this all semester so far, but I should have hit on it more in this semester, but this lecture. This is implicit, but I think y'all get this anyway. And have a great week, and I'll see you on Monday.